Just a moment while it uploads.
It says it's live now, Tony.
Oh, okay. I still have a spinning circle, but okay. Let's go forward.
Okay, wonderful. And I see Tony just joined us. Let's call this meeting to order for the July 8th meeting of the Salem Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. I'm calling it to order as Chair Dylan McDowell, and we will go right into roll call. Mickey Varney.
Present.
Alan Alexander.
Here.
Tony Cato. Tony, I see you, but we can't quite hear you. For some reason, the audio is not coming through for us. I don't know if anyone else can hear him, but
I can't hear him.
we can mark you down as present because I can see your mouth moving, but I don't know if there's, no, I still can't hear you there.
No.
Oh, now we can. Now it's there.
Hold on, so let me put my earbuds back in. I need to use those.
Is it coming across really loud when he speaks?
It was a little a little loud, yeah, but now I'm not hearing anything at all, unfortunately.
I think it's your earbuds. Sorry, Tony.
That's okay. I just didn't want to annoy anyone else that was out in this area if they heard. That's okay. All right. Present.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad we got that figured out. Woody Dukes.
Present.
Dave Frydenmaker.
Here.
Rick Hartwig.
Present.
Keith Norris.
Present.
And Paul Rice.
I'm here.
All right, we have everybody. Wonderful. Let's go into the minutes. Thank you, Tony. As you were mentioning a moment ago, I appreciate that you added a few comments in the minutes just to address some of the outstanding questions that folks had. So hopefully everyone had a chance to see that when you were reviewing. It was in the red text. But are there any additions, adjustments to the minutes before we move to approve? Hearing none, would someone like to move to approve the minutes?
I move that we accept the minutes.
I second.
Seconded by Alan. And let's do a voice vote for the minutes. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, it passes unanimously. The minutes are adopted. Wonderful. Well, we have a very full agenda tonight, as everyone can see, and a couple action items and a really exciting opportunity to talk with Chief Womack in just a moment here. Well, first, let's start. I know we did not receive any written public comment directly. Well, we were shared some of the comment from council, but I know we have a few members of the public that have joined us here. And I want to provide an opportunity if anyone there was planning to provide comment now, we can make space for that. Let's see, the chat is, I believe, only for co-hosts, but was there anyone that was hoping to, if you could raise your hand if you were hoping to provide comment, please.
Chairman, I would like to provide comments. Mary Graney. I can't find the hand up sign.
That's all right. We are happy. We recognize that technology can be a little challenging. So Mary, yes, please, if you could identify yourself and which ward you live in, that would be great. And then you have about 3 minutes for comment, please.
Committee. I'm Mary Graney, and I've been a 30-year resident of Salem. I live across the street, essentially, from Bush Park. And I was recently told by one of my neighbors about the landscape management plan that's being prepared for the Parks and Recreation and for Bush Park. And so I reviewed the plan, and there's a couple of things that I'm particularly concerned about. I appreciated the comments about climate change and how that might affect us in the future. In the old days, we knew that it could be rainy all the way up to July. But this year, you know, we had a heat wave in June. Last year, we had the smoke, you know, from fires outside of the city. And then we had the winter time with the ice storm. And we've watched the last several months, all the amazing cleanup efforts that have been going on to deal with the large wood and the hanging branches and those kinds of things. The thing that concerns me is the amount of kindling that is in the tall grass, especially above the parking lots by the hospital, that hillside there, close to the camas fields. And I saw the comments about, we like the grass to be tall until the wildflowers go to seed. There is a lot of kindling in that dry grass, and I walk those paths every day. So I would like to suggest that the management plan talk about two things: fuels management in the parks and fire danger, and how we might have a plan for public communication, going forward in any or all of our parks, where we thought that the things that were only forest fire dangers, are getting closer to home. So those were my major concerns that I wanted to talk about.
Thank you so much. I appreciate those concerns and appreciate you coming tonight and sharing that with us. Are there any reactions or other questions for Mary from anyone on the board? Okay, well, thank you so much. We will be discussing the plan in more detail a little bit later tonight, and obviously you're welcome to stay around for that conversation, but we will keep this in mind and really appreciate you sharing it.
Okay.
Okay. Was there anyone else that was, I don't see any more raised hands, so I think we can progress in through the agenda. Okay, well, I am very excited tonight that we have a chance to meet the chief with Chief Womack. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really excited to have you here and to learn more about some of the work that you're doing. I know that it's been a relatively new journey here in Salem for you, but I was able to hear your presentation to council just last month, and really exciting to learn some of what you've been up to. And I know that the board is all excited to hear it as well. So Chief, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate this opportunity. I'm gonna have about a 45 slide PowerPoint that I'm gonna bring up. I'm just kidding, but I do have a PowerPoint that I want to share here. So give me just a moment to get that started. There we go. Is that displaying okay? Great.
Looks perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for their time. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's been about 7 months now for me as the new police chief. I've loved every minute of it. I'm having a great time. And I've been very intentional about my approach towards my first year on the job. And it was kind of divided up into 3 phases. Some of you probably heard me say this before, but those 3 phases were basically really introductory phase, just spending a few months getting to know people and the community and the department, and then moving into an internal assessment phase of the organization. And then finally, where we are right now is beginning a strategic planning phase for the department, so that the next 6 months we'll be developing a strategic plan so that by January we have a plan in place ready to launch for the next several years. So even though we're halfway through the year of my plan, this is still an opportunity for that introductory phase. I've still been doing a lot of introducing myself to the community, and I see this as another opportunity. So thank you for that chance to do that with all of you. By the time we're done here, we won't be strangers anymore. So a little bit about myself. And again, if you've heard some of this, I feel like I've said this several hundred times, I think, because I have. So I apologize if I'm putting it through this again. But to introduce myself, I just want to touch on a little bit about me. My career-wise, I've been in law enforcement for 29 years now, and I spent all of my time before Salem in Stockton, California. That's south of Sacramento in the heart of the Central Valley down there. And that's where I was born and raised and grew up. Raised my family there, went through the public school system there, and did 28, almost 29 years with the Stockton Police Department there. I worked my way through all the ranks and the different divisions and areas, and I feel like I got a lot of good, well-rounded experience there in Stockton. And I spent the last 8 years there as the deputy chief, so the #2 person in command of the department for the past 8 years. So I think that prepared me fairly well, law enforcement experience wise. Education, I consider myself a lifelong learner. When I started as a police officer, I had nothing but a high school diploma, like a lot of the officers we hire now. And I continue to go back to school throughout my career, and I got my associates from a local community college, and I got my bachelor's in criminal justice, and then I finally got my master's degree in security studies from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. So I've got that educational pedigree with me too. A few of the experiences that I'd like to touch on that were a bit unique, I think, coming from Stockton. Stockton was the biggest city in the nation to go bankrupt, municipal bankruptcy before Detroit. And so back in 2007, when we were going through entering the Great Recession, Stockton was hit extremely hard. It was ground zero for the foreclosure crisis in the country. We had more foreclosures per capita than anywhere else in the nation. So it immediately dried up a lot of our revenue, and it resulted ultimately in a municipal bankruptcy. And what that meant for the police department, the experience that I gained is we went through dramatic instant cuts. So we cut 25% of our workforce. We went from 441 police officers to 320 in one fiscal year. And then had to go through that negative change process as far as how do you continue to police a very busy, violent city with 25% less police officers. And so, I like to say tongue in cheek that we defunded the police before that was even cool. But that's what happened in Stockton. And it gave me a unique set of experiences because I learned both how to do more with less in an extreme situation, but then also the silver lining there was rebuilding the department from the ground up. So the community passed a tax measure to fund more police. And over a period of 4 years, we hired 120 police officers back. And again, we got to kind of reset the culture of the organization, rebuild the organization in a new way. And I got a lot of insight from that as well. Second, there was all manner of major criminal high-profile incidents that I was oversaw in some way over my career. So I got a lot of experience doing that. And then thirdly, one of the most valuable experiences I had, I think, was the last 4 years of my career, and it was taking part in the National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice. Started under the Obama administration. It was a grant, and there was only 6 pilot sites across the country, Stockton being one of those. And we became a petri dish for testing out these concepts of how to build trust between the police and the community. So these concepts of procedural justice, implicit bias, how that can be a barrier to trust, and also applying a racial reconciliation framework in a municipal police agency between the police and the city. So I have hands-on experience testing out those concepts. It was a research-based grant. So there's online, if you look up National Initiative, I know it's a mouthful, National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice. And if you look at the Stockton site, the executive summary, a nice summary on there. And what it shows is that we were able to move the needle in the right direction in all of those areas. So now that's researched back approach on way to improve trusting relationships between the police and the community. And again, it's not something that I read about in a book. It's something that I was hands-on involved in. And so that's one of the main reasons why I'm here in Salem. So the next item here says, why Salem? I feel like I gained a set of experiences over my career, especially with that last bit about trust building, that this entire profession could benefit from, not just Stockton, not just Salem, but the entire profession in law enforcement. And I want to give that back. And so as I approached the end of my 29, 30-year career in a California agency, I realized that I wasn't done working yet. And I had more to do, and I wanted to give these experiences back to another agency. So I began to scan the horizon for other opportunities. And my wife and I had already wanted to move to the Pacific Northwest someday in retirement. And so when Salem popped up, it was just the exact opportunity that I was looking for at the right time. So that's why I'm here. I want to give back to this agency and this city, spend the rest of my career doing that. And we're in transition right now from moving up from California. So we're gonna settle in and become part of this community. Very excited about that. So that's just a little bit about me. My policing philosophy, I like to touch on this because while the exact approach to how we do business in different cities depends and it varies, right? And it'll be different in Salem than it was in Stockton, of course. But the overall philosophy that I bring, I think, is important and it's applicable here. And that there's 2 pillars to the policing philosophy that I have. They're equal pillars, so they both apply equally. The first being smarter policing. And what I mean by that is just like the name implies, it's being very smart about what we do. So be efficient, use evidence-based approaches make data-driven decisions, make sure we're capturing, using, analyzing data and using it in the right way to drive strategy for the organization that makes sense. So it's just policing in a smart way. Right alongside that, as I said, co-equal is principled policing. That's much more about who we are as an organization and individuals, our character, our morals and values, how we interact with our community, how we do our jobs. And so for me, this is the lens that I assess everything through that we do as an organization. So on one side, let's say we talked about reducing crime on the smarter policing side, and the other side would be building trust. So it's reducing crime and building trust have to happen at the same time. So one example I like to show is that we've proven in law enforcement over the years that we can effectively reduce crime through suppression. So I could flood a neighborhood with police officers, and we could basically pull over everybody that commits a traffic violation or stop everybody that looks suspicious and just be kind of an occupying presence in a neighborhood. And we will stop crime from happening. That will suppress crime. But at the same time, what you're doing there is you're damaging your relationship with the community. You're losing all your legitimacy. And so that's not both sides of my policing philosophy of being applied at the same time. So I like to look at reducing crime or improving community safety in smart ways, but it has to also simultaneously build trust and improve our relationship with the community. So that's my approach, my overall philosophy that I'm bringing with me into Salem. And we're working on turning that philosophy into reality now through the strategic planning process. I love this picture too. The gold man is awesome, isn't it? So I thought I'd just touch on a couple issues that were ongoing when I arrived. And as I was thinking about your charge here as the body that you serve on with parks, a couple issues that have touched parks and maybe of interest. And so protests, when I arrived in December, I started December 7th, there were some protests going on, and they had been going on for some time. Here in Salem, we saw an increased frequency and intensity of protests like we'd never seen before. Obviously, after the killing of George Floyd across the nation, we saw similar protests, and we saw that here in Salem too. And I think it's happening primarily because we're a capital city, so we draw in folks with their sometimes opposing ideologies or differing views who want to express themselves and demonstrate. And sometimes that causes issues with clashes or disruptions to traffic and so forth. And sometimes those spill over or occupy parks and have a direct application to parks. So I just want to touch on our approach towards protests. And I think we're all aware, it's pretty basic. There's a continual tension between these two, sometimes competing interests, especially for police officers like myself. We have folks practicing or expressing their constitutional rights, the First Amendment, Second Amendment. They have a right to do that. And we're sworn to uphold and protect those rights, actually, as law enforcement officers. On the other side of the equation, we have safety, public safety, the peaceful use of our public spaces, protection of property. And so sometimes those are competing interests when protests get heated and there's conflict going on. Maybe there's a permit or no permit that makes it even more complicated. And we're in the middle as law enforcement trying to navigate that environment between those two competing interests. And so I need to make sure as law enforcement that we are remaining neutral, and that regardless of any speech, for example, that's occurring, and let's make it clear, some of the speech that I've seen and heard since I've been here has been personally offensive to me. But it's protected. It's protected speech. And so from a law enforcement perspective, there's very little I can do to shut down speech, nor should I. And so we need to stay neutral, regardless of ideology or someone's speech or their political affiliations of any group on either side of the equation. We need to make sure we're making neutral decisions in the middle, balancing these interests of protecting constitutional rights while also maintaining public safety and peaceful use of our public spaces, for example. So I tried to express that early on, and I also put out a statement within my first 10 days. This is all online here. Let me click one more time here. So there's some centralized web information now that we have on the police department website. We were getting a lot of questions about protests, folks. Questions like, can police officers arrest people that are carrying weapons? Why are these protests happening? Do they have permits? Can we stop assemblies that don't have permits? These questions we were getting a lot of. They were frequently asked. So we created a frequently asked questions page and answered all of those on our website. And on here, you'll also see a link to the statement that I was just referring to, where I stated our approach, I stated our priorities, what I just explained to you about being neutral in the middle between these competing interests. And I also clearly stated that I had no tolerance for any form of racism within the community, or definitely within the police department as well. So that's also on the page. And we've just been tried to be very communicative, because I think it's important that we communicate this to the community and answer folks' questions to have better understanding of how we're approaching our protests and how they affect the community. So that's all available on the website. The other topic that I wanted to bring up, at least touch on, is homelessness. And this is something that wasn't new to me coming to Salem either. This is definitely a problem across the nation, or a concern or issue, a social ill really, across the nation. And it's even more intensified on the West Coast. And so it wasn't a new issue for me, but it is a little different here in Salem than I'm used to from Stockton. And what I like to say about homelessness in general is that over the years, I think there is no single agency to end homelessness. And it's such a complex problem when you're talking about mental health issues and poverty and unemployment, healthcare, addiction, all these deep social ills that the police actually have very little control over. We have no resources to address. That's not our bailiwick. We're not trained for that. And yet a lot of times we become the default response for anything to do with homelessness. That's changing for the better. And because there is no single agency to end homelessness, and because it is so complex, it definitely requires, for me, this is one of those problems that requires a high level of cross-boundary collaboration between agencies across different jurisdictions. For example, the city has little control or resources for social services. Those are typically county services that are provided, right? And so it even crosses over jurisdictions in that way, with different elected leaders, different agencies involved. So it's very complicated to get everybody focused and using the resources in the right ways around this one central issue or concern. And so while we're not the solution to the problem, the police, we are definitely a key stakeholder, and we need to make sure that we're at the table actively engaged in those type of regional collaborative responses. And we're seeing that begin to play out here in Salem. And much more resources are going to be coming online as well. So we're actively engaged in that as a key stakeholder. And this definitely affects our parks, as you know, with the declared emergency in the pandemic. And we allowed camping in the parks. We've seen the results of that. And now as a city, we're working our way back out of that and try to find the right way to back out of that. And that's going to be a long-term process as well. So, but we're right there at the table. Our role primarily is to make sure people are safe. Make sure people are safe. Especially, I think if there's crimes that involve violence, then definitely that's our role. We need to intervene. We need to hold folks accountable for violent crimes. Where it gets complicated now for us is, even in my career, I've seen over the years, the legislation and also case law has removed some of the tools that we used to use in law enforcement, so that we don't even have those tools anymore. So when it comes to, not that we should have ever used that tool in the first place, but even if we want to look at arrest as one of the tools to use, that has been taken away from us for the most part when it comes to low-level crimes, which are sometimes associated with homelessness. Things like trespassing, graffiti, or drinking in a park. These low-level offenses that are technically nothing but a citation anyway. The legislation and case law is changing on us to where we don't want to criminalize homelessness. And sometimes the last thing we want to do is just layer upon layer of an individual with low-level criminal offenses, to where even if they are ready to work their way out of a situation, they can't, because they're buried in the criminal justice system. And so those tools that we used to rely upon a lot in law enforcement have been taken away. So more and more, like I said, our role really is just providing a safe and secure environment for our service providers, engaging in that collaborative response, and just being as supportive as we can to maintain safety as we bring in the services and resources necessary to try to address the problem. But again, anything to do with violence or violent crime, we definitely have a role to play there, and we want to make sure we're actively involved in that. So with that, I just wanted to take time to introduce myself a little bit, touch on a couple of those main topics, and avail myself of to any questions that folks may have.
Thank you so much, Chief, and I really appreciate your time. And I will also note that I only recently saw the FAQ page on the police website, and I'm really impressed with that. And I know for all of us, there's sometimes questions we get from the community and from friends and whatnot. So it's good for us all to know. And I would encourage everyone to take a look at those resources to be able to share those as well. Let's open it up to the board for any questions. Mickey, I saw you came off mute. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, and thank you so much, Chief, for your presentation. It was really, really informative and helpful. I had a question about the community trust and justice. What sorts of examples could you give me of how you're doing that within the communities? And do you have plans for doing some presentations at the high schools, for example, once the students are back in school?
Yes, I think, and a little bit about me, I'm pretty thoughtful and methodical, and I'm a process guy. So like, I don't really rush into things. I always want to think things out and make sure we have a planned approach towards everything. So there are some definite things that I know we can do, but I'm taking my time and kind of building the infrastructure to do it right, I believe. And so we're laying the groundwork. But what that would look like, for example, in a real world setting would be a series of perhaps listening sessions. And some of this stuff isn't brand new, right? They're not new ideas, but this is the process as I see it. Whether that's, let's say, schools, where there's concern about school resource officers, we see how that played out. There's obviously a distrust there between the police and the schools, or some folks in the schools, or parents or students. There's other communities that feel maybe they haven't had a voice with their police department before. There's communities that have the concerns with the way they've been treated by the police before. There's a lot of history there with our African-American community going way back before I was ever a police officer. So these issues we need to talk about, and we need to create a setting where I, as a police chief, can create a safe space to have a conversation and really listen, get that perspective from the community, capture the narrative, the themes that come out of those conversations, multiple listening sessions, and some themes will emerge. So for example, from my past experience, some themes that emerged were the way folks feel that they're treated during a traffic stop, right? The way folks might feel if we did a probation or a parole search in their home in front of their children or their wife or girlfriend. Those are themes that would emerge from these conversations. And then as a police chief, when I hear those and I understand those, I can make decisions going forward with that perspective in mind, as far as training, policy, practice, ultimately transforming the culture of the organization. So it's receiving input from the community in that real way, and then actually applying it in real ways within the organization. And then to close the loop, it's reporting back to the community on the changes that were made. And that cycle continues and never stops. It's not like you win everybody's trust and it's over. This is going to be an ongoing, endless cycle of continual efforts to enhance trust between the police and the community. So that's one real practical way that we want to build that here in Salem.
Thank you very much.
Are there other questions? Yeah, Alan. Alan, you're on mute. Oh, you're still on mute, Alan. Trying to ask you to unmute here. There you go.
There you go. Chief, in your brief time here, what do you see as the biggest challenge to the police department and in the field of law enforcement?
I'm gonna take a chance and say this because every police chief will tell you that they need more bodies, right? And they're under-resourced. But we are, and it's a challenge. And the reason why I say that is because when I arrived, there was an effort underway to assess the police department. There was an independent audit underway for a performance audit, a community policing audit. It was initiated by the council, and that's all wrapped up now. And the findings of that audit showed that it's going to be very challenging for us to take the time away from the calls for service that are happening, given our resources, to invest in some of this trust building work that I'm talking about, to spend time in schools, to attend neighborhood association meetings, to do what I'm doing here with you tonight. It takes time. And if your officers are just a slave to calls for service nonstop, it's very difficult to pull them away to just have time to engage with the community. And that was one of the biggest takeaways from that audit. And I also noticed that myself. I was afraid to mention it almost because, like I said, most most police chiefs will say they're understaffed. But just the staffing ratio here in Salem, so we have 189 sworn, let's just say 190 police officers, and the population, we can estimate it between 170 and 180, right? And so the ratio there is only maybe 1.1 officer per 1,000 residents in this community. And for a mid-sized city with homelessness concerns and crime concerns that we have, the busy nature of this city, 1.1 officers per 1,000 just by itself is a red flag. West Coast cities of similar size, usually you're looking at anywhere between 1.5 or 1.6 officers per 1,000. So just seeing that before I even arrived, just knowing those numbers caused me a little bit of concern. But now that I've been here for 7 months, I've assessed the organization myself. I've looked at how busy we are and the things we're dealing with. We've got the independent community police audit that reaffirmed that for me also. The prior chief had identified the need for more officers as well. And so for me, it's real. I'm never going to use it as an excuse. We're going to press forward. We're going to continue to squeeze blood out of this turnip always. But it is for the type of work that I really want to do, and I think this community deserves, it is going to be a bit of a challenge without the adequate staffing. So I'm just going to bring that out there as a staffing challenge. And right now, and I don't want to speak too long-winded about this, but for example, I've already transferred 13 positions from other areas of the department back to patrol just to handle calls for service. So that's a reduction in service to the community. We've taken people out of investigations. We've taken people from the school resource officer program. We've taken some people that were in administrative assignments around the department and transferred them back to patrol just to make sure we have adequate patrol response to 911 calls for service. So we're having to make those difficult, priority decisions within the department because we're understaffed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Appreciate you being here, and appreciate your comments on kind of those two particular challenges related to parks. I think one of the issues that we've been dealing with on the board or that we've been discussing at great length is the homelessness camping within parks. And in particular, some of the board's concerns and my concerns have been around the safety of the city staff and some of the encounters that they've had where they've had guns pulled on them, or they've had encounters that have been threatening to those city staff just as they're going about doing their jobs. And one of the frustrating things, I think from my perspective, is that I understood the city's kind of tough spot they were in with COVID and with homelessness and allowing the camping. I just wish that had been backed up with the resources to ensure the safety of the city staff as well as the park patrons, right? And so, I know you're talking about your role there, and I think you're right, is to help ensure that safety. But could you kind of speak to how you're trying to do that in a proactive way, rather than a responsive way?
Yes, thank you for that opportunity. And I know there were some incidents. I believe there were BB guns. I mean, not to diminish it, but I know there was a contracted service worker, not actually a city employee, that was confronted and got bitten by a dog and so forth. So there have definitely been some incidents. And so our approach there is training first and foremost. We have trained park staff. We're setting up another training on safety and awareness and how to handle situations that you may be encountered with. So we're doing that ongoing with city staff because I'm concerned too. I want to make sure no one gets hurt. And then we also have an officer present every time we do a planned cleanup. And so, for example, we're at Wallace again. What's today? Thursday, this morning. So we were back at Wallace this morning, and we always have 1, 2, 3 officers out there with park staff as they're cleaning up and moving folks along. So we always have a police presence when requested by staff and when there's a planned cleanup. There's other times where they're maybe just doing routine checks or mowing lawns or doing other stuff where we can't have police there all the time, obviously. And if something happens, then they need to understand how to back out of those situations, how to immediately contact the police so we can get there as soon as possible. So we just try to communicate and coordinate as best we can about that. But we're also exploring ideas right now about, even if it takes me expending overtime and having officers come in on their day off to assist park staff, we're looking at those options as well. it's just going to be a balance, right? Of, how much police presence can you provide all the time for routine park maintenance, for example. Unfortunately, that's the situation we're in. We shouldn't have to do any of that, but unfortunately, that's the reality we're in right now. So I am committed, and I talk to park staff often to finding the best solution we can to keep everybody safe.
Chief, could you share more about your relationship with the park ranger? I know that the ranger works closely, obviously his eyes in the parks all the time, and curious how that relationship has evolved and your experience with that.
Sure, thank you. It's coincidentally, just this morning, he was here in the office with me, and I swore him in for some additional duty. So he technically had the authority of a code enforcement officer 1 originally. They promoted him to a code enforcement officer 2, which expanded a little bit of authority. So now he has additional coverage in all parks, not just 3 other parks. And he has some additional code violations that he's now authorized to enforce as well. So that's helpful for the issues that are faced in parks. And we have a good relationship as far as communication and coordination. I like to think of it kind of as a 3-layered approach, right? We have administrative approaches to things. So we have non-sworn city staff, park staff, for example, that can deal with low-level issues regarding permitting or, trying to obtain cooperation from folks regarding park issues. And then you have a park ranger who can be a little higher level of authority there that can actually issue citations and take a little bit of enforcement action for folks. And then you have the police. And so I like to think about that layered approach, because it's not appropriate for the police necessarily to be involved in all those layers. We need to make sure that we all communicate and coordinate very well so that we can step in at the right moment, keeping those 3 layers of approach in mind. We have a very good relationship. Like I said, he was just here this morning, and we're trying to find ways to even be more coordinated and communicate better. Get him to know more of my staff, so that if there's an instance where he does have to call for help, if it turns into that situation where now it's time for police to engage, we want to make sure he has a kind of a hotline to the PD, and that there's some resources available to respond if we're not already there.
Wonderful, thank you. Any additional questions for the chief? Okay, well, I'm not seeing any. Thank you so much, Chief. It's been wonderful to learn a little bit more about your background and hear about your approach to policing in the community. And I'm glad to have you here in Salem. And I hope we see you again sometime at another one of the friendly outreach events that you're hosting in the year to come.
Well, thank you again. Thank all of you for your service on the board. I know I appreciate that volunteer time, and it's very valued. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
Have a great evening. Okay, well, let's move into our next agenda item. And I think, as everyone knows, we are now going to review the Gear Master Plan revision. And I believe we have Rob. There's Rob, just popped up. Rob, I'll let you take it away. And I think everyone was here last time, so we're all up to speed in terms of the revision underway. But the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair McDowell. Good evening, everyone. I just have a few slides I'm going to share this evening just to highlight the changes that have occurred to the revised update to the Gear Park Master Plan. So I'm just going to jump right into it. In the graphic shown here on the left is the concept that was presented last time back in March, and on the concept on the right is the revision. 2 things just to highlight. First, we increased the size of the dog park. The large dog park was previously 3/4 of an acre, and the large dog park is now 1 acre. And we accomplished that by removing a path. You can see a paved park path and extending it toward the stormwater treatment area. The other, perhaps more significant change was that we did reduce the amount of on-site parking proposed per the direction of City Council. So both the dog park and the reduction in parking quantities are following the direction of City Council. So here we initially had 94 stalls proposed, and now we are proposing 70 stalls, and that does include 4 ADA and 66 standard stalls, which is the same amount of ADA stalls we previously had. So we're not reducing ADA or accessible parking, we're just reducing the standard stall quantity. right here is a comparison of those parking total, or how the parking is being kind of distributed by the proposed park uses. So I'll just walk you through this real briefly. So starting here with the column consultant, these are the recommendations from Greenworks, the project consultant, based on their past experience doing park planning and their familiarity with the demand that comes with some of the uses that are being proposed here. And so those numbers, we did take those and reduce that recommendation prior to the council's direction to go further. And that was largely responding to public interest in minimizing parking. So the plan I previously presented was 94. And then tonight we do have the 70. And the way we've accomplished that is we are relying on the existing parking at the site for both the dog park and for any kind of passive use. And then we're focusing the remaining, the parking we are providing on making sure it can serve some of the more popular uses that we're anticipating will bring a lot of children and families, and likely will bring stuff with them. And so that, the first thing that comes to mind is the playground and the splash pad. We are also providing some parking for the skate park and the dog park. We did get direction from City Council to increase the size of the dog park, and we did the best we could by increasing it there by a quarter acre. And I'm just showing here some comparisons of some other off-leash dog areas in town, both in Salem and then adjacent to us in Kaiser. In West Salem, we have Orchard Heights Park. It has a very small fenced off-leash dog area at a less than 1/10 of an acre. It also has an unfenced off-leash dog area that's a little larger. Cascade Gateway is probably most similar to the concept proposed for Gear. It does include a small dog area and a large dog area. They're both slightly larger, but just slightly than what's being proposed. And then for reference, because it's often gets discussed, is I did include the size for the Kaiser Rapids Park in the city of Kaiser, which is a little bit more generous with a ½ acre for the small dogs and 3 acres for the large dogs. Just a couple more slides and I'd be happy to take any questions. There were some comments or questions last time about if the park was accessible by transit service. And so I am going to take a moment just to highlight the nearest bus stops. So on State Street, there are, it is part of the Chariots Core network. So service is more robust on State Street. And there is bus stops located at State and Hawthorne, and it's approximately a ½ mile walk from the park. Also, approximately a ½ mile walk from the park would be bus stops located on Center Street to the north. So either if you come from the north or the south, it's approximately the same distance. So with that, I just wanted to keep it pretty brief tonight, and I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Rob. Keith just sent me a message that he has somehow got kicked out of the meeting and is trying to rejoin. So hopefully we'll have him back momentarily. But I had just a quick question right off the bat here. And I really appreciate, first off, the work that you've done on this and the phased approach and how you clearly gave an accounting of where the parking spots were coming from and how you were being thoughtful about that. But in terms of the phased approach and saying that this many spots will go to these different areas, what will the space be? I mean, obviously master plans are an iterative process in terms of implementing them. And so what would the space be in the interim as you're waiting to put in the parking either all together or with the space that you have now, if for those 20 spaces where they were, what is that area going to look like?
Just to clarify, your question is really what are we going to do with the kind of the open space that we have now that we've reduced the size of the parking lot? Is that
is, yes. And then, well, and I see in the report here, it says it should be noted that new parking will not be added in the next phase of development, will be implemented in sections at those high-use facilities as those high-use facilities are built and demand for parking increases. So am I correct in understanding that as you were to add things, you would then add parking? And so how would that process work in terms of what the area looks like?
Great. Yeah, I can definitely address both of those. So first, starting with what we anticipate to be phase 2 development of the park following this approval of this master plan. Looking at the input we got through the process and also the estimates we have for funding for this park coming in the next few years. It is likely we're going to focus on developing the skate park, which is number 3, as well as enhancing the bike park. And in doing so, we have a rough budget put together where we would do some grading and we would do some park paved development, trail system development to provide access kind of from that part of the park to the developed part of the park. What we don't have in that budget right now is putting in any portion of the parking lot. So that would leave there would be a point in time where there's going to possibly be a skate park and the bike park, but no more additional parking built. And following that, I would anticipate, but it wouldn't. We don't know for sure that the next phase would be probably focused on the playground and the splash pad and some of the other amenities around it. And with that, we would likely do a half development of the parking lot. So we would focus in that scenario on the northern half, and we would develop 35 parking stalls, which would serve everything but the multi-use field. And then to address the other part of the question, the area of the park that was occupied previously by the larger parking lot will be left as just open space for now. It would require further modification, either through amendment or an update, but you certainly could then modify this parking lot to provide more parking if everything was built and there were parking demand issues. So it would certainly be an option for the city council to consider at that time and SPRAB to provide input on. If possible, we could expand the parking a little bit more.
I appreciate that. Is there, given the timeline, would there be any value in potentially adding trees there to expand the canopy cover, knowing that this could take a while and you could possibly really add some space with those 20, putting trees in those 20 spots?
I'll just say yes. That would be my answer. I think it's safe to say that we would not actively not plant trees in that area. And in the master plan, there is, I don't know if you see my cursor, we are showing some planting of trees in that area, suggesting that we would do that.
Wonderful, thank you. I want to open it up to everyone else. I've been hogging the questions here. And Keith, welcome back. Did anyone else have questions? Alan, yeah.
Rob, a couple questions. One, what did you use as a basis for determining that 70 spots would be adequate?
So we are responding to council direction here. So we're doing our best to allocate to reduce parking, because that we were asked to do, but we're trying to do it in some kind of logical fashion, and that's why we provided the breakdown there, so you can see kind of what our thought processes was and how we've gotten at our initial recommendation to our current recommendation. Now, I'm not saying that I know for sure this will be an adequate amount of parking for every special event or every kind of sport tournament that may happen in the future. In that scenario, if there is parking demand issues down the road, I can envision kind of two things. It could be a combination of both of these things. One would be to build more parking somewhere on site, and that would require a master plan amendment or an update. The other option would be management actions. So that would either be having a special event management or having traffic demand management, where you're encouraging people to access the park in a different way, or maybe you're using a different parking lot somewhere else. And I am, again, talking about special events. You may have a shuttle that would connect an off-site parking lot to the park. So those are kind of the two ways I would foresee it going in the future with this plan. So either we would add more if it's an issue, or we would do these management actions, or it'd be a combination of both.
Well, I'm concerned that I hate to see us in a position of managing a crisis as opposed to a plan. And just as a minor point, the staff report, there's a 10-spot difference between the report you just showed and the passive uses. I think you showed 5, and actually the consultant recommended 15 based upon the staff report as it's presented. But I'm still concerned. This is going to be an extensive park with a lot of facilities. It's not surrounded by neighborhoods. Everybody's got to get there by some method, and walking may not be that efficient. And a half a mile with a family with mom with small kids, a half a mile is a long ways to go pushing a stroller, and particularly another toddler. the prior recommendation from this group reduced the consultant recommendation by 33%. And your presentation now reduces that further by another 25%, roughly half of what the consultant recommended. I'm just concerned that we're building a nice park and it's not going to be serviceable by the general public. And as such, I'll have to admit, I'm a bit concerned. This board passed unanimously the previous recommendation, and now we're encouraged to pass another one with no data. I think there were 3 or 4 comments from the public about not wanting any parking, any additional parking, and yet now we're going to find this to be appropriate, where our last one was at 94 spots. So I'm having a difficult time with this.
Thank you, Alan. That's helpful feedback. And I will note too that we do have the ability, even if we choose to recommend the plan, perhaps we could add some other commentary in our recommendations or as part of our motion to, for instance, say that this is, we do not want to see any more modifications beyond this number, that this would be the bare minimum, or other types of recommendations like that if we feel that's appropriate. So I would just put that on folks' minds that if we want to consider how we make that recommendation, if we decide to, or if we decide not to, thinking about all of our options. Keith, and then Paul afterwards.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And sorry for dropping off earlier, and apologies if I'm going to rehash a few things that I missed as my computer just totally froze up. But anyway, glad to be back. I just want to pretty much second everything Alan just said. I think it's difficult to go that far against kind of consultant recommendations on the parking, and I think it's an interesting question of process of I understand, Rob, you're in a tough spot with city council telling you one thing and us now telling you another, and where do we go? But I think going from, taking city council's direction, if that's city council's direction, right, I think they kind of have the final say. So I'm not sure it would be appropriate for us to provide a recommendation one way or another if this is what city council wants. That's what they've specifically asked for after already hearing our previous recommendation. I think the park looks fine. I think it's there. I was curious on the parking, and we might have talked about this last time, so forgive me if we did, but would the addition, I remember last time talking about the addition of bike parking, which I think would be appropriate, but I think it was said that didn't have to be included in the master plan. Is that correct, that that's something that could be added without a master planning process?
Yes, so regarding bike parking, it is not typically included in our individual park master plans. So that it is this is a unique difference between in our the Salem revised code for new developments. Parking for parks, there's no minimum or maximum, but there is for all development there are standards for bicycle parking, and so the any development would be required to provide bicycle parking, and park development typically does that at the minimum is usually expanded upon. I know there have been some public comments about covered bicycle parking. That I would throw that in category of a design detail, and also I'm not sure who would use it if it's raining and you're going to the park there's picnic shelters, but there's no other covered outdoor facilities here. So we did not specifically add in bike parking, but it would be developed with any improvements in the park. Okay,
that's good to know. And I had a similar question about, given that my understanding is the concerns with parking here are related to the city's greenhouse gas emissions targets. Are there electric charging stations that are part of it? Would that be also kind of a design feature that would be outside the master planning process?
Yes, so the cost estimate for the master plan was updated since it was last brought to SPRAB. Part of that cost estimate changes were, it ultimately was a reduction because the parking lot's smaller, but we also made sure that the electrical infrastructure would be available for electric charging, and what we're committing to is that we would evaluate the quantity of electric charging stations that would be appropriate at the time we would do any parking development. And so at this time, we're just ensuring that, so-called EV charging ready in terms of infrastructure planning.
Okay, excellent. And can you say, so there's, I think, a couple hundred of existing parking spaces. How does that compare to kind of the identified need relative to the developed park area that's already there, right? Do those parking spaces match that identified need? Does it overshoot that?
Well, I think what I'm not the best person at this meeting to answer that. I think I would actually ask on some of my fellow staff members, maybe Becky with Recreation, Chair McDowell, if that's okay with you. Could I ask her to come and speak to kind of her observations?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Becky, I don't know if you're available.
Yeah. Hopefully I'm there. Can you hear me?
You're here. Yep.
We got you.
Okay. So, and I want to make sure I answer your question correctly. So I can talk to as far as previous experience with scheduling sports and that type of thing. But when that happens and there's tournaments that take place there, the existing lot is full at capacity or close to capacity, if not above. So I mean, what remains to be seen once the additional facility is developed, how all that transpires. But I mean, we have some of the same concerns that are being shared, but as Rob mentioned, we're in a situation where we're trying to meet the direction that he's been given. But does that answer your question, or do you what?
It does, Becky. Yeah, thank you. I think that kind of gets at what I was after. I was also thinking in terms of kind of a standard consultant recommendation for 2 big soccer fields and 2 ball fields. What are those numbers come out to? But consultant recommendation probably isn't quite as good as actual on the ground data for when we have that stuff. So that answers the question sufficiently.
Yeah, I guess I would also just say that, and this is what I had shared with Rob and Patricia beforehand. And I think what I had shared at a previous meeting, when you have multiple fields of one type, in this particular case, with it as it sits right now with 2 baseball fields and 2 soccer fields, anytime you get multiple fields at one location, that generally relates to a situation where people are wanting to have tournaments there. And when you add tournaments, a lot of the people that participate in those, some are local, but a lot of them are coming from out of town. And so that generates the additional, like what we see at Wallace Marine Sports Complex, specifically the softball complex. A lot of those are out of town visitors, and they're definitely not walking or biking or taking a bus. They're driving, and in some cases, multiple cars for a family or a team. So, that the parking lot does get used quite heavily as it sits right now. And I would anticipate that would be the case going forward as well.
Great. Thank you, Becky. The only other question I had was related to one of the design changes I noticed. I don't remember if you flagged this, Rob, as you were talking some of the changes. That's when I cut out. But the drop-off, curbside drop-off area, I noticed got dropped. Was there was that related to kind of the restructuring of the parking lot, or deemed not needed because everybody's walking a half mile from the current bus stop, or?
It was primarily due to the restructuring of the parking lot. So I think it would certainly is a good thing to have. I think one thing that's absolutely critical to have that the layout that we ended up providing does is it has maintenance access, or the city vehicles can get in there with the mower very conveniently. And so it was really hard to come up with a concept that would both provide for that and would have a reasonable area for a drop off. And so we kind of just, we're not entirely sure the drop off would be used very often. So we ended up with the layout we have here.
Okay, thanks. Well, one of the thoughts I had with the drop off, and I think this gets at some of the concerns that Alan was raising, but also Dylan's remark of if we end up sending this forward to council, or however we send it forward with some sort of statement, is the idea of public transportation. And if we're going to be relying on that, then that needs to be greatly enhanced to be able to actually access this park. And the idea of building a bus stop into that pullout area was one thought that I had of that, right? Just having that BA stop. I don't know if that would be reasonable or not, but just an additional thought there. That's the extent of my ranting on this. Thanks.
Thank you, Keith. Paul, you were next, and then Dave.
Just a couple comments here. One thing, I think you did a good job in addressing the council and public's concerns in terms of what you did on the park. I think that's it was done well. So I think the council should feel comfortable probably passing that. I have concerns as well, regarding what was previously said. I think it appears, unless there's tournaments, that the ball field parking would be sufficient to service the new developed area. But however, it would seem to me that if there is a tournament, parking is going to be an issue. And I think, especially since a lot of the traffic there, which overloads the existing parking, tournaments, people that want to go to that are not using public transportation. They're using their private cars. And then getting on a bus service, especially if it's out of town people, and walking a half a mile is not going to be an option they're going to want to take. So anyway, but I think the fact that there may be some in the future areas that you could develop more parking if the need should arise is just going to have to be a consideration, So anyway, but I thought you did a good job in modifying it to meet the concerns of the city council. Oh, and one last one. This is even if we put electric charging stations on there, it still is a parking spot.
Very true. Dave.
Hi, I'm concerned about the revisions because it seems like we're only addressing the parking, but we really aren't addressing the design of the park that draws the people to the park and the purpose of the park. And my question, I guess, is, Rob, is there a reason why this needs to be passed now instead of going back and revisiting in light of the greenhouse gas emissions requirements, what the park really should look like in terms so that it doesn't draw too many vehicles into the park? Because we didn't reduce any of the amenities, we just reduced the parking.
I guess I would say that the concept we presented previously, the parking was the mentality behind it was that if we built the park today, this is what we would do. And now I think there is a recognition that the parking development will not occur immediately, and so we're trying to set ourselves up for the future. Now, if there's a rush to adopt the master plan, well there is and there isn't. There is a rush in the sense that we do. The intent of even initiating the update was to just identify what the community preferred to see in the undeveloped portion of the park, as well as what their priorities were for implementing those new amenities. And so that has led us to focus on this skate park, which is the next step, and we are preparing to go right into that if the master plan is adopted. In terms of the larger park development and the ball fields and some of the other amenities, there's not a rush. So we aren't going to be developing those anytime in the next 5 years, for example. But when we take this opportunity to if we look at today's master plan, the 2016 master plan, it has come from kind of a piecemeal approach from amendments, and it has led to some it's not an ideal master plan for several reasons. And I think that if we are going to update the master plan, it does behoove us to have a logical plan that at least makes sense. And I understand that the parking is a tough issue aside from that, we are trying to make it all work.
Yeah, it seems to me that we need to focus on that, the park systems, the overall master plan for the park system, because it sounds like it needs to be updated to include greenhouse gas emission goals. And that might lead us into a different design for this park, or even not a park that's not quite so big and maybe not so many regional parks.
So can I just say something to that, Patricia? So our comprehensive park system master plan will be updated after the city adopts a new comp plan, our Salem plan. But we have an identified need for parks and for ball fields. And this is a community park. So we don't have a lot of community parks. And so we're trying to meet demand, and that's what we're trying to do here. And so whether it gets developed, over time, I think there's still going to be a need for ball fields. And this is one of the few spots we have that's actually flat, other than the new Hazel Green property, which is up far north. So it made sense to work on this plan because it's partially developed for tournaments already, and it made a logical, it's centrally located, it's flat, and it's in a great location. So that's why we're focused on completing this park.
Okay, that kind of reinforces my point, because the Hazel Green site, everybody's going to have to drive to. So it's definitely a vehicle intensive park.
Well, there might very well be bus system up there as well. So I don't think that's necessarily true.
Yeah,
But I mean, this one is built, this one has existing, access as compared to Hazel Green.
Rick.
Yeah, Chariots is aware of the master plan and the development, and they're also converting to a lot of electric buses now. And as this master plan is put into effect and changes are made and demand rises, they're going to look at all possible route changes for them. So they are aware of it.
Thank you, Rick. And I appreciate that insight, especially knowing you serve on both capacities. And Dave, you raised some interesting points for sure, and for us to consider. And I think it is important with all of this to remember that this has been a long master planning process in terms of public engagement and soliciting feedback of what people want to see. And Rob, as has been said before tonight, it does put you in a tough situation in terms of trying to respond to the public and in terms of the recommendation of the council to cut the parking. And so I hope that we as a board can find some ground here in terms of what we recommend and what we decide to say, to acknowledge that, but also to make sure that whatever is in this plan, people can actually get to, and that there's access in the community. And Keith, to your point, maybe that does include a recommendation that updates to Chariot and some more funding or whatever that means is part of that recommendation, that if they're going to cut the parking, there needs to be alternate means considered and not just taking away that access. Mickey, was your hand up?
Yeah, I just had a couple of comments. This has been a really good discussion. I can definitely see both sides of it, because we're in a transition period right now where we are trying to encourage less vehicle use and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And I understand that. But on the other hand, as others have said, having a place for tournaments, et cetera, attracts folks to this area. It's good for our economy, I like the innovative suggestion of possibly an off-site parking area with a shuttle. Maybe that's something that could be implemented when there are tournaments there to help offset that. I mean, that's a possibility. When I take the master plan and look at it with the whole satellite map, actually, one way we could offset the greenhouse emissions a little bit, I think, is to plant a lot of trees on the property, even in areas that we don't have plans to develop yet. Because there are lots of places around the single track, the bike park, the flexible outdoor space. and even the proposed parking, additional parking. There are a lot of places that we could just plant trees. And so I'm wondering if for the future, if we could just go ahead and encourage the tree planting to be done ahead of time.
I'll just jump in with a comment back. I think that's a great idea. And I do believe this year has been a recipient of some of the recent tree planting efforts. And so if you go out there, you will see some more in the developed areas of the park, but you'll see additional plantings just recently.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Rob before we move into discussion of how we want to approach this as a board? Rob, I do just want to clarify one other piece. I know we're going a little late here, but in terms of the dog park expansion, I know that is something that council directed. And I just want to be clear that, was that supported in what the public comments were, public surveys and everything? I know I will admit I'm a big supporter of dog parks. I want people to have dog parks, but you also cannot, as was mentioned at the council meeting, you could not take your dog on the bus. And so you need a parking spot to go to the dog park. So they're kind of, to Dave's point, by increasing the size of the dog park, therefore increasing the need for parking for people to take their dog to the dog park. And so I'm just kind of understanding how I understand where the parking has come from, some of the public comments, but is the dog park expansion solely coming from the council direction, or was that also backed up in some of the early meetings and open houses?
So going back to the public comment received through the process to staff, there was a lot of interest in the dog park. There was not, to say, a lot of specific opinion about the size. I think they saw that we were adding it, and most people were just happy to see that. Now, I know the direction from council, a lot of it has to do with Councillor Hoy and the public feedback he receives as a city councillor. And I will assume that maybe some of that has led him to direct, to put kind of suggest that the dog park should be larger, and that why it was ultimately part of their direction. So I hope that helps. Strictly speaking to our process, there weren't not a lot of direct comments about the size of the dog park, but there was a lot of interest in it.
Thank you. I think it's a good time for us to turn to board discussion here and how we want to approach this. And correct me if anyone sees another option, but the three choices I think we have here is one is to recommend adoption of the plan as presented. One would be to reject or to request changes, or another would be to adopt with changes. And I'm hearing a lot of concerns, and I think that this does echo a lot of what we had last time and some of the conversations that were reflected in the minutes. What I'm hearing, and once again, please add to this, is that if we were to adopt this or recommend adoption, that we would really want to be clear that this is the furthest we would want it to go, noting that this has already been cut down twice at this point. Two is that, as Keith pointed, that this needs to be paired with some really thoughtful investment in public transit to make sure that there is actual access to get there if you're going to reduce parking. And then I think to Mickey's point is that prioritizing trees in every possible area is a really easy way for us to be considering the greenhouse gas emission offsets on this space as we're filling it in. But from there, I just want to open it up and see what everyone thinks. Yes, Paul.
I just think a lot of work has gone into this, looking at the history of the park, different plans, looking at some of the old plans. I'm sure the new one is a whole lot better than those old ones. And the city's kind of, during this whole process, has kind of grown around it too. I just think that to reject the plan would be throwing a lot of good work out the window, and it accomplishes really not much at all. Because we're a small board, and city councils we already forwarded it with recommendations. City council is the one that kind of bounced it back, and they have the ultimate authority on approving it. Now, I would be in favor of amending our, of recommending approval, but with concerns, and the city council can do with what they will on that. But the concerns would be that parking may have been reduced to the point where it will hinder use of the park, and that needs to be considered as this project goes forward. And the public transit thing, well, that's a whole nother thing that we could encourage, but I don't think there's too much we could say about that. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Paul. Alan, we're going to share something?
Well, I was going to wait and let other people talk first. I don't know or monopolize it. I still am very concerned, and I cannot support approval as is. I like the idea that I think you suggested there may be some recommended caveats to go with it. Paul's mentioned about concern about limiting access to the park artificially, and that's probably not what the council intends. At the end of the day, council's going to make their decision. But why do we need to make another recommendation? They've already decided what they want. So it sort of begs the question, I guess, as an advisory board. We've done that already on what, based on the information we had, what we thought was the best compromise, and that was the last one that's sent in. But please, I understand the importance of greenhouse gases, but I'm not too sure artificially driving people away from the park or keeping them from accessing the park may not be the way to achieve that goal of CO2 reduction.
Thank you, Alan. Are there other comments or thoughts? Mickey, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I really like your suggestions in terms of adopting this option with a few caveats, and the ones you mentioned, especially with the development of transportation options and trees. As a scientist, I'd like to somehow see some sort of data to show, to help guide things one way or the other. I realize we can't do that overnight, but it helps me in terms of usage, timing, et cetera. That's just another idea to have out there. I do appreciate the idea that someone mentioned about limiting, are we limiting access to young children, to seniors, to individuals with disabilities that may not want to go that half mile or may not be able to drive? And personally, if it's 117 degrees out again, who wants to walk a half mile without trees? I mean, come on. So to get to the splash pad, no, I appreciate, Chair, what you brought up, because that's the direction I'm leaning. It's adoption with caveats.
Dave.
Isn't an option, we've already made a recommendation and the council can make their decision, but is an option to stick with our original recommendation? Because I really don't think there's been time to study the greenhouse gas emissions issue and how it affects parks. And if we don't want to delay the adoption, we could just stick with our original recommendation.
I think that's definitely an option. We could recommend adoption of the original plan and not the amended version. I don't know if everyone had a chance to watch the council video or the recording of this discussion. I think just to quickly summarize it, there currently is the climate action plan, of which I'm serving on, and there's also the Salem plan, and there is the council goals for cutting greenhouse gas emissions. So they have these targets set, and the data that they have there shows that transit, or cars especially, transportation in Salem, is our largest greenhouse gas emitter. And so the discussion really focused around the idea of how can we try and get more cars off the road and try and drive people more into public transit and taking alternative means of transit to get to places like park. And thus some of our Salem projects in terms of more smaller parks and regional access. saying that purely as trying to relay the conversation of the council and just for information of kind of where that is coming from. So some of that data does exist in terms of transportation and how that is impacting our greenhouse gas emissions. All that being said, I hear what you're saying completely and understand that, you know, what Alan said too, is 20 spaces really going to make a difference in terms of the trade-offs of people not going to the parks. But I would say that from my own perspective, this is where I personally tend to be a little bit more in line with what Keith was saying, that it needs to be, if you're going to cut parking, there needs to be investment or a simultaneous decision into some other mode of transportation to get people there, not just, we hope that there will someday be more chariot. And so, you know, Rick, I don't know how far along the chariot conversations are, but if, you know, before there was a firm cut in parking, it seems like there needs to be some consideration that there is more accessibility than a half-mile walk.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to when there is a need, there will be a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, how many years is it going to be before there will be a need? Who knows? But you know, and they're very willing to even talk about a bus stop and even some type of a shelter. We're working on all sorts of different transit centers in different parts, and the fact that Salem is growing. And so they're very, you know, again, it's, you know, when the need arises, they will definitely step up.
Alan.
I appreciate that, and I believe that. However, from what I hear from friends who work there, there's a long list of routes that people are requesting, and that directly relate to getting people to work and getting people to their job site and those sort of things. And from what I understand, that the funding source for chariots, majority of it comes from grants, federal, state, and tax dollars, and that the fare box only generates a small portion of what it takes to run the chariots. And so, while we might think that's a great idea, you can't just magically add a bus route or extend a bus route. There's a cost associated with it, and there's many other community areas that are also seeking bus service with strong justification.
It's a great point. Woody.
Yeah, I kind of agree with David about staying with our original one, and then if we wanted to attach the caveats to that one, not to the modified one. And you know, parks are looked at, these areas that are available to us, you know, they're looked at for size and location and flat and all these other things to determine what these parks are best suited for. And this park is supposed to have been determined to be best suited for the type of uses that they're designed into it now. And so if these particular number of spaces goes with these particular uses, then we should stay with the original plan. I had another thought, but that I forgot. So anyway.
Thank you, Woody. I appreciate that. And if it comes back to you, let us know. So that is an option we hadn't talked about, that we could recommend adoption of the original plan with caveats, such as one caveat could be that any reduction in parking needs to be accompanied by a plan of how others will access the park effectively. But Woody, I see your hand comes up. Do you want to finish that sentence or that thought?
Yeah, this plan has the opportunity to be changed over time. It's not being built right this minute. This parking lot this number of spaces is not being installed right this minute. So it still has the option of being readdressed at a later date, I would think.
Absolutely. And I think this is really more of a maximum number that they're putting in here in terms of the estimate. And so if 10 years from now we have bus rapid transit across the city, I think there's great opportunities that we might not need this. So I think we are getting to the point where we might want to have a motion on the table to discuss. And I may suggest that if someone were to make a motion, it might be along the lines of adopting the original plan with the caveats, such as any further reduction in parking needs to be accompanied by a plan for public transit or other means to get people there. But I'm open to what folks feel is most appropriate. Yes, Keith.
Well, I was just working on drafting a motion, and I was going to propose that I share a screen if that is acceptable to everyone.
That is, I think, a great option. This is one of the limitations of the digital world, is that we can't just.
I don't know how that works with public meetings, but I'm going to go for it.
I think as long as you make sure to close all your other tabs, because everything here is being displayed to the world.
How am I looking? Are you looking
it looks
at the Word
great.
document?
If you could zoom in a little bit for us,
Yeah.
That would be good. Perfect.
So I was viewing this as kind of a two-part motion. One where we kind of reemphasize that we found the original plan acceptable. And I was in the middle of texting here as you were calling, or writing it as you were calling for it. So I didn't finish my thinking here on it. And then two, that I think I don't remember which one of us said it, but emphasizing that the plan's a good plan and we don't want to throw it out. And I think Rob and the team has done some good work on the revisions and accounting for the council's request, right? So saying that we do think those changes are acceptable, but if those changes are adopted, they should be accompanied by certain things. One of those being enhancement of public transportation options that I was going to say are implemented simultaneously with development of the park.
Thank you, Keith, for doing this. I'm very comfortable with that wording. I think that really does capture the conversation pretty well. Are there others that have thoughts about that?
And I was thinking there were a few other elements to that, but if not, I can remove the A.
Mickey, would you like to see a tree maximizing the tree canopy? I think that is a really important. That's one of our tasks, is trying to increase tree canopy across the city. So I'm comfortable if we want to add maximizing tree canopy in all available space, but I want to make sure we're also keeping it within. We don't want to get a laundry list here, so trying to get to our top 3, I think.
But I agree. I was a little bit confused when Rob responded that there have already been a number of projects there, but I think there's still some open spaces where we could plant more trees in preparation for the future as well.
Yeah. How, Alan, Dave, I feel like you have both expressed some really good points and some reservations about this. How do you feel about this wording as it's stated by Keith?
I found it more palatable, but I'm trying to say if we stand by our recommendation for the original plan, but we find a revised plan acceptable. I think I know what we're trying to say, but I just read that with a little bit of confusion in my own mind.
How about we prefer the original plan because of the time and effort that's gone into it, or something? Well, we don't have to explain why.
Well, it's not what we prefer. We're charged with giving our best opinion to council. And we thought we had done that in March. We found out that our best opinion wasn't palatable necessarily to them. That's the reason I find it difficult to all of a sudden have a different best opinion. But I think I know where this is going to, what council is going to do. They're going to do what they really want to. That's the benefit of being an elected official. But I couldn't support anything unless they have, if they're going to do this, how are they going to solve the transportation problem? Not just saying, well, in the future, we hope things will be better.
Alan, what if we were to say we stand by or emphasize our recommendation for the original plan, and then instead of number 2, but say, but if council decides to pursue the revised plan, we recommend, and then have the bullets that Keith has here.
I think that's masterful. I could support that.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I do like we stand by our recommendation, our original recommendation for the original plan.
whoever makes the motion, I will ask that you read this out loud so we have it on the verbal record as well, so we have that as. So Keith, I don't know if you want to make the motion, being the one who wrote it out for us.
Dylan or Keith, the date is March 11th.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you're missing an S on choose it. There you go. All right,
I think
well, why
that
don't
looks
we
good.
have a motion and we can
I
have
think
any
we
further.
will.
Oh.
I'll second it. Who makes it? I'll second it. Yeah, I do appreciate you listening to my thoughts, and like I say, I take our charge seriously, and we need to give the best advice we can to council.
I appreciate that. I really do, Alan, Dave, both of you, and Woody. I feel like you've all brought up some really good points here that that pushed us a little bit in a different direction, and I think it was really good for us to consider that. So, Keith, will you please read it for the record on behalf of if you feel comfortable making the motion?
I will do so.
Go ahead. Either
Were
way.
you gonna do it? Take it, Mickey.
Yeah,
Go for
yeah. I think I can read, maybe. No, I think it's great. I move that we stand by our recommendation for the original plan approved by SPRAB on March 11th, 2021. But if council chooses to pursue the revised plan, we encourage they do so with 1, enhancement of public transportation options that are implemented simultaneously with development of the park, and 2, maximizing tree canopy in the park.
Masterfully done. Well done. And Alan, you were a second?
Yes, I certainly am.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, and we can have any further discussion on this motion before we move to a vote.
A final discussion point, just for the purposes of clarity in the record, that we're referring to the Gear Park Master Plan in the original plan. Probably should have wrote that in motion, but I think we're clear on that.
It's a good point for the record. Thank you, Keith.
Yeah, I'm fine with that amendment, whatever we need to do.
A friendly amendment. Dave.
Could we state about maximizing tree canopy in the park and state that it's for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions? I mean, because it may not be readily apparent why we recommend maximizing the tree canopy as part of this move.
I think that's a great point. I am comfortable considering that a friendly amendment, considering that is in keeping with the discussion we had as a group here.
I went with offsetting, Dave. Is that appropriate capture?
Yeah, that's more appropriate.
Thank you all for this. Any further discussion before we move to a vote? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So I'm going to go through roll call. Mickey Varney.
Aye.
Alan Alexander.
Yes.
Tony Cato.
Aye.
Woody Dukes. Oh, Woody, it didn't come through for me.
Aye.
Okay. Dave.
Aye.
Rick.
Aye.
Keith.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So it carries, and our recommendation will be sent on to council. Thank you all. And, Alan, as you said, I appreciate you taking this charge seriously and making sure that we give the best available recommendation.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me.
Wonderful. Well, let's move into our Bushes Pasture Park and Deepwood Estate Gardens draft cultural landscape management plan presentation, which was a little bit of a mouthful there, but really wonderful. If everyone hasn't had a chance to at least look through the longer document, it is really fascinating. I know I learned a lot about Salem history and also really appreciated all the photos to see what it was like 150 years ago. So I do not know who is giving this presentation on behalf of the planners, but I will turn it over to Patricia.
Yes, good evening. Thank you. This is Paul Agrimis from Greenworks and Rachel Edmonds from MIG, and they're the consultant team that did this wonderful plan. It began about a year ago, so I'm going to turn it over to them and they'll walk you through it.
Thank you. It's great to be here tonight. We're going to share our slideshow. All right, can everyone see that?
That's
Wonderful.
great.
Okay. So, why is Salem developing a cultural landscape management plan? Well, there's 6 reasons that we've identified for the cultural landscape management plan. This is a unique landscape in the heart of downtown Salem. It's a one-of-a-kind place. There's a complex layering of natural systems and features with historic built and designed elements over time. And we need to acknowledge the dynamic nature of the landscape. And so inherently landscapes are dynamic, responding to fluxes and precipitation and heat and other natural pulses. The landscape is in an urban setting, and there's additional variability, as we were just discussing, or you were just discussing, related to Gear Park, climate change. We need to protect the cultural landscape's character-defining features while meeting contemporary needs. And we need to ensure management of park resources is in alignment with the park's cultural landscape and Bush family wishes. And lastly, the need to develop an objective decision-making process for proposals that might be made for improvements or changes to the park.
Hey,
Paul,
can-
I'm just gonna minimize your screen a little bit. The presentation is too big for the
Thank you.
screen view. Okay.
Okay, is that better for everyone? Sorry about that. Very
That's
good.
great. Thank you.
Okay, so this window pane of images gives some indication of the background for this site. So the combined properties are 96 acres. There's significant history, including the indigenous occupation and white settlement. We have a remnant oak savanna, which is one of the classic defining features of the site. Pringle Creek, of course, native wildflowers, defined primarily by camas lilies and the fawn lilies that appear in a couple of different areas. We have the gardens of Elizabeth Lord and Edith Shriver. They were the first landscape architecture firm in the Pacific Northwest. And we have 2 historic museums, an art center, the Bush House, and the Deepwood Estate. The site is on the National Register of Historic Places. The historic period of significance was 1878 to 1938. And we have play areas, a network of paths, and a soapbox derby track. So here we are in the spring of 2021, or actually summer now, and we're moving towards finalization of the cultural landscape management plan. So these 2 images show that landscapes do change over time. There is the 4th dimension of time here, which is very much a factor. And we want to be sure to incorporate contemporary needs as well as preserving the historic character of this site. So we can go back to the General Land Office maps, the GLO maps of 1852. And in the red highlight here, you can see, if you can see my cursor, those are the boundaries of the current park. And then in this next image, we're sharing the period plan as of 1938. So clearly what dominates this setting are the Bush House and the grounds surrounding the Bush House, the Lord and Shriver designs at the Deepwood Estate, Pringle Creek, of course, and then the natural settings associated with the oak groves, the upper and lower oak groves, and the 2 pastures. And then fast forward to 2020, when this existing conditions map was prepared, you can see there are some key contributions that have been made over time, including the McCulloch Stadium as part of the Willamette University, a major in-holding in the park. We have the Soapbox Derby, which is added in 1951. And we have Phillips Field as well as major contributions that have been added. Okay, so there's been substantial public involvement and engagement throughout this process. We started by meeting with the tribes. We met with the Grand Ronde on site last July and had a good tour with them. We've continued to engage with the tribe since then. We had 2 stakeholder meetings. Those included the Mission Street Parks Conservancy, Willamette University, the Salem Art Association, Friends of Deepwood, and other groups. There have been 3 public open houses, the most recent, which is just concluded, And there's been presentations as we're conducting tonight with key organizations like yourself. There's 4 major plan goals that I'm going to share with you. So goal number 1 is to deliver an enriching park experience for Salem residents and visitors centered on the cultural landscape. Goal 2, build awareness, understanding, and appreciation of the significance of the site to the indigenous people of the area. 3, support and protect the legibility of the historic character of Bush's Pasture Park and Deepwood Estate Gardens and their context. And 4, enhance the ecological health of the Oregon white oaks, Camas wildflower areas, and Pringle Creek. So to accomplish these goals, we identified management areas across the park, and you can see that there's 14 that are illustrated here in this figure. What I'm going to do next is share with you snippets of some of the recommendations for these management areas. First of all, I want to review some overall management guidelines. And each management area includes the following sections. There's a profile of that area. In some cases, there's sub areas, area goals, primary management objectives and approach, the program, things to consider, recommended actions and tasks, seasonal considerations, and potential future capital projects. So we'll start with the Rose Garden. The area goal is to elevate public awareness of the significance of different flower beds and linkages to the design work of Lord and Shriver. Then in terms of the historic orchard and shrub collection, which is part of the period of significance, this is to manage the Lord and Shriver orchard and shrub collection as an attractive garden consistent with the historic character of Bush House. Next, we'll go to management area 3, which is the Bush House Museum grounds. So for this area, the goal is preserve the complex diversity of buildings, structures, gardens, and flowers to support an equally diverse set of visitor activities and enjoyment for users of all ages, with careful attention to the interrelationship of forms, materials, and surfaces. So I want to highlight a couple of things here. Each of the management areas will have a little thumbnail sketch, as you can see here, just in the upper left-hand corner. The particular area is highlighted in this magenta wash that shows the Bush House Museum and Grounds. Okay, so here for the Deepwood Estate Gardens, there's several sub areas here. There's the garden room sub area, transition sub areas, and the support buildings and structures. The area goals preserve this historic garden as the magical and enticing landscape it is, inviting visitors to absorb its holistic and detailed beauty. Explain the visionary role of Elizabeth Lord and Edith Shriver in its design and long-term development and management. So management area 7, the Deepwood Estate Gardens. Things to consider. Modifications to historically significant area may require compliance and formal review by SHPO and the city. And one of the key areas here is the boxwood hedges that are here. They're subject to the boxwood blight that's in the Pacific Northwest. And so that could include replacement with plant materials of similar form and texture that are resistant to the boxwood blight. The alternative is to use a lot of herbicides and a lot of very intensive sanitation practices to limit the impact of the blight. Okay, the Upper Oak Grove. There's 3 sub areas in this Upper Oak Grove. And I'm just going to touch on the primary management objective, which is to manage the historic Upper Oak Grove to conserve the existing Oregon white oaks as a spectrum from stabilization to restoration. And we'll touch on that in just a moment. And then things to consider are important here. Protect the oaks while also maintaining lower impact park activities that have taken place here since the historic period. So picnicking, play, gatherings. And then promote the Oak Grove health by gradually transitioning the art fair out of the Upper Oak Grove. And just for background, as you're probably aware, soil compaction around the root structure of the Upper Oak Grove is contributing to the decline of the Upper Oak Grove. So removing the art fair is driven by protecting these iconic features to the park. Okay, the upper pasture. Protect and maintain the open pasture, adjacent oak trees, and the strong visual association with the Bush House grounds. All right. We do have a decision flow chart here that was developed to screen activities that might be proposed for development here at the park. So any potential action, whether it's a development or a management action, is filtered through these 4 screens. So is it consistent with the standards that are established within the cultural landscape management plan? Is it compatible with current or anticipated staffing and funding for the park and adjacent programming uses? And then stakeholder interest. If there's going to be a requirement for volunteer activity to implement a proposed action, is there demonstrated stakeholder funding or support as needed? And then, of course, city standards. So making sure that we're consistent with the memorandum of understandings with the tribes, and then archaeological review, horticultural standards, historic preservation standards. And then if something gets all the way through, then it's going to be approved. If something hits a red flag in terms of not being consistent with these screens, there's the potential to revise the proposal and then evaluate again that revised proposal. So that is the quick overview of this plan. And I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions because I saw that there were a lot of questions with the last presentation, and I just wanted to make sure there was sufficient time for all of you tonight.
Thank you so much, Paul. Wonderful and really concise overview of a very long plan. So I appreciate that and well done. Woody, you are our fearless representative on this planning process. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add in terms of what you've seen or your own experience with it. Woody, you're on mute. There you go.
No, I was quite pleased with the way this all was presented and written, and I found a few little odds and ends that I passed on to Patricia, but they were just little odds and ends, nothing that really affected any of the generalities of this presentation. So I highly recommend how it turned out.
Wonderful. Paul, I think I'll just start with our public comment question to tie that together and bring it back in. And I will say for myself, I was really impressed with how climate forward this plan was and the considerations about climate change and resilience. And I mean, as Mickey pointed out, 117 degrees is really changing things. And so I think it's just incredibly smart for us to be planning as effectively as possible. So the plan, I don't know if you were here at the very start for the public comment period, if you caught that, but really thinking about fuel or kindling with the tall grass on the hillside and fears about fire danger and how much you feel that is included in the plan or any responses to that.
Yes, well, we didn't get into the level of specifics in terms of fuel loading and matters like that, but it is definitely focused on addressing climate change. And none of us expected that Salem would see 117 degrees this year. So, clearly we need to factor that in. There are, Western red cedars are being very stressed by our change in terms of drought and increased temperatures. big leaf maples in some areas are stressed as well. So these are part of the current landscape that may not continue in the future. So that may mean more ponderosa pines or other or deciduous trees that can handle the heat and drought cycles that we may be seeing more of in the future. So all of this is, something that would be run through that flow chart in terms of decision making, in terms of potential for needed replacement of existing tree canopy species. In terms of fuel loading, yeah, that's a very specific management recommendation. There's a balance to be struck in terms of keeping elements of habitat that support all the creatures that are a part of what support these ecosystems. So we need to have insects, we need to have birds. So if we remove all the fuel or potential fuel, that has an impact in terms of the wildlife on the site. So certainly fuels can be managed. And my understanding is that that would be done in the context of thinking of the ecosystem impacts of any particular change.
Wonderful, thank you. I had, I don't see any hands up yet. So while everyone's thinking of their questions, I did have one. If you could clarify on survey number 3, I see in the quick report we got that the number of people filling it out went down quite a bit from in the 259, 351 down to 27. And then it says 57% were in agreement with the process moving forward. And I was just I was curious why more people were not in support of the process moving forward, or if perhaps they didn't fill it out, or if you could just shed more light on that.
I wish I could, because I'm still sort of absorbing the input from Open House 3 as well. So I'm not surprised by the drop off. I am surprised by how steep it was. It's a big document. So I think a lot of people probably just fatigued from getting through it. I mean, we've gotten a lot of comments that it is readable. It's sort of paradoxically concise while it's really long. So that's encouraging. But in terms of only 57% support, I don't really have a good answer for that currently. I would have thought that it would be higher at this point, but I don't have a hypothesis in terms of why it's not, say, 70%.
Well, and just to be clear, it says 81% of respondents indicated they agreed with the management plan recommendations, and then 57% were in agreement with the process moving forward. But Patricia, I see you're on. Maybe you have some.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So the question was, do you think that the plan provides a way to move enough recommendations to manage the park in the future, to move it forward? So it was kind of phrased maybe a little oddly, but a lot of people were just neutral on it.
Okay.
They just, I think it got a little bit too much into the specific management aspects for a lot of people to know whether it provided enough recommendations for staff to use it to move forward. So I think that's my interpretation of it anyway.
That's really helpful, especially knowing there's some neutral in there. Thank you. Other questions? Dave.
Off mute here. I was reading through it. It's very well done. But I kept asking myself, so why is there no discussion about the animals, the wildlife in the park, and those that existed before the park when it was more rural and less urban? And how is the management plan addressing the birds and the other animals and insects and all those other creatures that inhabit the park?
Yeah, that's a good question, Dave. So there's the major driving reason for that is, as you can imagine, it's easier to inventory the plant community because it's static. It doesn't move and change very much. And surveying wildlife is a more intensive inventory process. And so we didn't include that as part of the scope of the project. Not that it's not important, it's just that, it didn't make it to the final scope of the project. So one way to look at it.
I would say that we did address some concerns about the ground squirrels are addressed in the plan.
Yeah.
So that one was, obvious to us just from it affects a lot of other things in the landscape, just safety, and the health of the oaks nearby.
And I would also add that there was a lot about the restoration of the riparian area and getting rid of a lot of the invasive species. So I think the plan focused more on habitat rather than individual species.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Dave, do you have any follow-up questions?
No, I just would really like to have seen a little bit more discussion about the wildlife and recommendations that they're going to be considered for any changes going forward.
Alan, you want to go next?
Listen, Dave, I can help you out. I'm sure originally there were deer in that area. We've got plenty of them in South Salem. One or two of them like to live in my backyard and eat my birdseed. I would happy to help relocate them to Bush Park. But being on the serious side, I'm fortunate because Patricia was kind enough to attend our neighborhood association a month before last, and she presented much of this information. It was well received. The discussion afterwards, the people were impressed with the quality of the research and work that went into this. So I think it's a great effort.
Thank you, Alan. Rick.
Yeah, I'm incredibly ecologically inclined, but I'm also incredibly involved, or have been involved with the arts, and the art fair was just always been a wonderful addition to Salem. Now, when you talk about relocating or moving, I assume that we're still going to have the art fair, but does that mean it's going to be when it's really, one of the real joys of the art fair is that you're in the shade. So it's really hard for me to put both of them together. I also the amphitheater type area down there has always been really special. I was in a former life, I was musical director of the Children's Educational Theater, and we had productions there every summer during the art fair. So the plans are, how much of it would it be moved, and where would it be moved to? So I've got two things tearing at me, and I'm not really quite sure how to handle it. By the way, the entire I read through the entire presentation, and it's wonderful. I learned a lot about the history of the whole area, and it's a great document. But again, I'm really torn with the art fair, and so what are the plans in terms of the art fair in terms of movement?
Yeah, I can talk to that one if you want, Paul. So we've been talking to the Salem Art Association, and Jennifer has also been talking to them over several years now because of the concerns about the oaks. And so we're looking to move them out from under the oaks on the lawn area, but areas that are already paved, are fine. So there's lots of shaded areas under the oaks where that could still happen. And then we're looking to maybe have use some other portions of the park that maybe aren't as shady. So that might be an issue, although most people have canopies. But so we're just kind of looking to reduce foot traffic on the oak roots and the lawn areas mostly.
Thank you, Rick, for bringing that up and clarifying, Patricia. Any other questions? I will also note that I was really impressed with the engagement with the tribal community and the expectation of continued engagement with the tribal community as this moves forward. And I like some of the ideas there about different ways of education and opportunities to help showcase what it used to be like, and some of those partnerships, I guess is the best word. So well done on that aspect. And I think that it was very spelled out directly in the plan. Are there any other comments or questions, or does the board feel comfortable recommending adoption of this?
Dylan, I've got a couple comments, that's all.
Sorry, yes, please. Apologies if I couldn't see you there. I think I had my screen cut off a little bit.
Oh, no, it's simply, yeah, it was a very impressive group of people that came together and put it together. So yeah, I'm all in favor of, making an adoption thing. But I think regarding the wildlife, you just have to realize that that park is a natural area, or sort of modified natural area island for wildlife, and that does not lend itself to much diversity. It's been shown time and time again that unless you have corridors leading from one wilder area to another, your diversity just gets limited. There'll be cats from the neighborhoods and so forth coming in there. So that may not be something that's terribly important, other than trying to reduce the ground squirrel population. But anyway, other than that, impressive document.
Thank you, Paul. And Mickey, I think you and Paul were the two that slipped down on my Zoom screen there. So did you have was your hand up and I missed it?
No, but it was an impressive document. It's funny because the 300-page plus document, of course, the first place I went was the climate, addressing climate change from pages 151 to 159. And it went into some great detail. I just think they did a great job on it.
I agree. And thank you, Woody, for being part of the process and really going through with detail and making some recommendations on behalf of SPRAB as well. Yeah, Woody, you're on mute.
I just want to say quickly, the gray squirrels were introduced into Salem area in the 30s. They're not native, so.
Thank you for that. I think it sounds like overall we're all very impressed with this plan. Is there a motion for us to recommend adoption?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. Seconded. All right. Is there any further discussion on the motion before we move to vote? I'm seeing none, making sure that I do not have anyone off my screen right now. All right, I will quickly go through roll call. Mickey?
Aye.
Alan?
Aye.
Tony?
Aye.
Woody?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Rick?
Aye.
Keith?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So the plan is recommended to be adopted. Thank you all so much. And thank you for your work on this, Patricia, and everyone else, Paul and Rachel, there we go, for your work of making this all possible and for making a really nice, concise presentation for us to do the highlights.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Perfect. Let us move on. Next up are board member updates, and Keith, you are up first with the library committee.
Great, thank you. So I am serving as SPRAB's representative on the Library Strategic Planning Committee. After a few delays with scheduling, we had our first meeting of the committee yesterday and went through an equity lens workshop that was aimed at developing some tools we can use throughout the strategic planning process to kind of ensure that we're being equitable and kind of embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion elements into the library strategic plan. So we've really just kicked it off. Here very quickly, they will be getting a survey out for community input. So we've done the equity lens. The next step is kind of getting input and engagement from the community, going with the survey. I think that's been translated into 5 different languages, using focus groups, et cetera, just trying to learn the different perspectives and needs of the community relative to the library. And then September is when the committee will kind of reconvene to start the hard work of reviewing that input and actually writing the plan. So we've got a little bit of a hiatus here in our work as the community input is gathered. Several work sessions planned in September, October, November area. And then I think the plan is scheduled at this point to be completed January, February of next year. So that's the status update on that.
Thank you, and appreciate all the time you're putting into that. Any questions for Keith? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I can quickly update on the park usage and permitting subcommittee status. So we had our first meeting with the LGBTQIA plus community, the task force rather, and it was really informative. We were able to share the charter and the goals of our committee, our subcommittee, and talk about experiences that they've had. We learned about a project they're working on called the Safe Spaces Project to figure out how to make safe spaces throughout Salem more explicit. They've primarily been working with businesses to put up signs and to really make that a focal point of different businesses to identify as safe spaces, but looking now into how city spaces could fall into that as well. So that was part of our conversation. We have a meeting next week with the Human Rights Commission, HRC, and then we still need to schedule one or perhaps 2 or 3 public meetings. I did email Robert today. I know he couldn't be here tonight to figure out some dates for that. We were originally hoping to maybe have some recommendations ready by August. I think at this point, just given scheduling in the summer, I think it makes more sense for our subcommittee to make recommendations in September to give time for spacing of those public meetings and for us to continue reviewing policies and come back, which I don't think will cause any problems in terms of timeline with city council or anything, but make sure that the job gets done appropriately. And as we made the original motion, we allowed ourselves some time to check in today and make adjustments as needed. So I would suggest unless there's any pushback, that I think September is a good time for our next opportunity to touch base. But I'll open it up real quick. Is there any other members of the subcommittee that would like to share anything? Okay. Well, thank you all. Let's move into our information reports. We do have one item that Christine would like to cover from Mission Street Park Conservancy. And Christine, I will let you, thank you for your report, and we can ask you some questions about that afterward. But first, I wanted to give you the floor so you could share what you wanted to talk about.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. It's nice to see all of your smiling faces again tonight. I'll be brief. The Conservancy would appreciate this group making a formal motion and providing a letter in support of our brickwork project in the Tartar Old Rose Collection in Bush's Pasture Park. You may recall having heard about that project before. It's a Lord Scriver feature. That's the central focal point of the Old Rose Collection. And over the years, the brickwork has deteriorated to the point that it's just a mess, and people, you really can't walk in there without, it's a fall hazard. And the bricks are going to continue to deteriorate in condition if we don't do something. So we've got a project going on. We're going to tear it all out and redo it in September. And we're almost done with our fundraising. We just need a little bump to get over the top, and I would really appreciate your support for that. That's my ask.
Thank you. And so just to clarify, you're asking for us to make a motion in support and write a short letter that you would be able to then point to as part of your fundraising effort to show the support of the Park and Recreation Advisory Board. Okay.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments from the board? Thoughts? Woody, I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but having just participated in the master planning process for Bush and the associated areas, I wonder if you have any thoughts about this as well.
Well, it's one of the last parts in that garden, that rose garden area there, that the structure that needs to be redone, because she explained all the conditions that it's under right now. So yeah, it really is. It's a significant piece if you're in that part of the garden. So it's well worth having it replaced.
Christine, if we do move forward with a letter, would you be able to provide us with some sample text describing the project as to ensure we have accuracy and are not trying to write this in a way that potentially does not capture the project?
I'd be glad to. I don't want to, I'm not wanting to layer another assignment on top of you. It sounds like you've already got plenty on your plate, so I'd be very happy to do that.
Are there any other comments or thoughts or potentially any concerns for us moving forward in support of this project?
Christine, just a quick question on the kind of the cost involved. How much fundraising have you done and what's the overall budget? And I think you said removing it at the end of the summer. What's your kind of replacement timeline on that?
We've hired a mason with experience with historic brickwork. And he's going to do all the brickwork work in September. And the project won't be finished, however, until about March of next year, because it's got roses planted in the midst of the brickwork, and we can't really plant roses until early spring next year. So the project will be done. All the brickwork will be done but in September, and the replanting and everything will be done in March. And we're looking at a open house or celebration of some sort in May or maybe June if we decide to wait till the rose blooms are really pretty.
And what was the overall budget?
The overall budget is $20,200, give or take, and $18,000 of which is the cost of the mason. The rest of it is digging out the roses and replacing them and redoing the soil and the city permits and all of that kind of stuff. Now, the city of Salem is funding half the project through the good offices of Jennifer Keller and Patricia Farrell, primarily Jennifer, I guess. So we really appreciate that. And they're funding about half of the cost of the mason. So, and we're almost there. We just got like $3,000 or $4,000 left to go. And it's frustrating as heck.
Yeah. Very good. And are they reusing the bricks then? You said historic.
Yes, they are. They're cleaning and reusing the bricks. And where the bricks are so deteriorated that they can't be reused, the city has a little stash of historic bricks that we're gonna pick some appropriate pieces from.
Great.
It's a really cool project. We're very excited about it.
Thank you.
I was going to put my park operations hat on and ask about the maintenance aspects and making sure that there was a plan for that. But knowing that Jennifer is involved, I imagine that those bases have already been covered because she always does a good job of making sure that things that are put in are going to be maintained and taken care of. So it sounds like that's already addressed.
Yes, and one of the best things they're doing about this is right now the bricks are just on a sand base, the way they used to do it back in the day. And so that's all coming out, and they're going to put sand and gravel down and then a concrete base and then replace the bricks over it. So it'll be a completely, a much more solid and less shifty surface for the bricks to sit on, and much more impermeable to the little grasses and things that seem to manage to grow up in there.
Wonderful. Any further questions, or would someone like to venture a motion in support of this project? Yes, Alan.
I think it's reasonable. I would support that as, with the caveat that they provide us with some boilerplate to include in the letter to make sure that we're both accurate and we can do it in a more timely fashion that way.
I think that's a good point. And with that caveat, I am willing to, unless someone else would like to write the letter, I'm happy to take that on. Seems like a manageable task. So whoever, as we make the motion, we should just clarify who will write it, and then assuming, and I'm happy as we usually do to have me sign off on behalf of SPRAB to have a name attached to it.
I second it.
I will formally make the motion then, that I will make the motion in support of the Rose Garden project and or the Rose Brick project, and that we will write a letter in support. I will sign off on behalf of SPRAB. Woody, do you want to repeat that second for the record?
I will second that.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, let's quickly go through a roll call. Mickey,
Aye.
Alan,
Aye.
Tony,
Aye.
Woody,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Rick,
Aye.
Keith,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. So Christine, perhaps the motion passes. And so SPRAB is in support of this project, and I'm happy to work with you on getting a letter together, and we can work on that in the next week or so.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, board members. Appreciate it.
Thank you. While we have you here on video, I just want to open up the floor. Appreciate the reports that you provided. And were there any questions that board members had for Christine in regards to the materials she shared? Okay, it looks like you are free to go. Thank you so much, Christine.
All right, thanks a lot.
All right. We want to acknowledge that we're a little bit past our usual time, but I really appreciate the robust discussion we've had on everything tonight. So we can move right into our information reports. And let's start with urban forestry. Hey, Mylan.
How you doing?
Thank you for the report, Mylan. Is there anything you'd like to share or call out in addition to what you have there?
Not anything different than I gave you guys in the report.
I think you were, I don't know if you were here last time when we were all commending the format and just how you've presented the information, but we really appreciate how much you're fitting into a short space and the details you're giving us. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I had a little extra time last month to spend a little time to update you guys on what we've been doing. So this time was a little shorter. Sorry about that, but
there's a lot of good information.
Bombarded with ice storm stuff. So I'd say, 95% of the work we're doing is still cleaning up from the storm. So aside from watering schedule for all the new trees. So
any questions for Mylan?
Mylan, you mentioned watering for the new trees. Does the city ever water existing established trees in any way?
We go as far as 3 years back.
Okay.
We feel like there's some trees that didn't do well. It's usually a 2-year establishment period. And we feel like once we get them past that 2-year time period, they do pretty good. But we do follow up on some of the third year. So we'll do the first round of watering will be all the trees the last 3 years, and then we'll mark some off the list if we feel like they're doing pretty well. So this year we are watering quite a few more trees because of the heat. So
right. And is that weekly watering you're doing, or?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Is it weekly watering you do on the new trees, or?
Really, it's just as fast as we can get through them. We got a new water truck this year, which has really helped. We went from a larger truck to a smaller Isuzu that still carry the same amount of water, and it's helped us get almost double time what we were doing last year. So, we put 10 gallons on the tree and moved to the next one. And our driver this year is a Salem native, so he's pretty good about getting around and getting tree to tree. But he's making the rounds. If you see a little Isuzu truck with a 500-gallon water tank on the back, they're out making their rounds.
Great.
Mickey, I see your hands up.
I had a quick question while we're on the topic of trees and watering. My question is there a particular amount of water that would help an older tree? I guess what I'm concerned about, we're all supposed to be conserving water. All the state agencies, are cutting back on water use. And then I look outside and I look at my big leaf maples and my big oak, and they're dropping leaves because they're dry. And I just didn't know if it would help to give them a little bit of water, but I also want to conserve water, so I'm kind of torn. What do you recommend?
No, I mean, I think it would help to do a really deep watering occasionally, like, once or twice a month, let the hose run under that tree for an hour, on up to 100 gallons, depending on the size of the tree. So a big leaf maple would love a deep, a deep watering, and it would really help get it through the summer, a couple times through the drought. So, and just think about those roots are going, over into your neighbor's yard and under your house and everywhere, anywhere it can find water, that's where they're going. So, I mean, depending on the tree, you can do some research on the tree and see if they like watering. But I'd say pretty much any tree in Salem would enjoy a few deep watering, some of the older trees and younger trees as well. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm not as worried about my conifers, but definitely the deciduous trees are struggling a bit.
Yeah, most deciduous trees like summer water. That's their growing period. So they're gonna be looking for water anywhere they can find it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, I live on a short block with 3 houses on each side and 13 50-year-old city oak trees. And one of the problems that we had for I've been here for over 40 years. One of the problems that we had was the aphids dropping, and for we'd have to watch our cars if we couldn't get them in our garage, which we can almost every day. I walked out of a pair of loafers one day; they stuck to the pavement. But in the last, I don't know how many years, you've had the Rasmussen Tree Service that have been injecting into the tree that I guess kills the aphids, and it's wonderful. So thank you very much for that, and I hope that every year that you keep contracting that out. So thank you, because now I can walk across the street to the mailbox and not walk out of my shoes.
Yeah, there's been some discussion on changing that policy, and we may try a few different things, and if it doesn't work, we'll go back to using them. But it's potentially next year we may try some ladybugs. So we'll see if that's I've used that in the past before, where you introduce a couple hundred ladybugs in those areas where we would typically inject or to do some aphid control.
A lot of ladybugs.
Yeah, a lot of ladybugs. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions for Mylan? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mylan.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Patricia, let's go into our Parks and Natural Resources update. Anything that you want to share beyond what you sent us already?
No, just the Ludwigia spray. Second year of spraying is going to start after the Ironman competition. And there's lots of outreach happening. There's new signs going up, or new information on the signs in the parks. So just there'll be two sprays this season. There's been a big reduction in the coverage already. We're going to do a drone flight over it before the spray, and so, but just from from the ground or from the boat kind of photographs, we can already see a big reduction in the coverage of the weed on the water.
Wonderful, thank you. Appreciate that update. Any further questions for Patricia based on the written report or what she shared just now? Okay.
I'll just add that in September, we're going to give you a presentation about the urban beaver strategy. So I know Keith will be good. We'll be happy about that.
That'll be great. Thank you. Keith, get your questions ready now. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Patricia. Let's go into our Parks Operations update. Once again, Jennifer, anything you want to share that was not included in the report?
Not really. Just to clarify, it was mentioned earlier when Chief Womack was on that we were at Wallace today doing cleanup. Actually, that was at Cascades. I think he got that confused with last week. Only to say that we're going to toggle back and forth between Wallace and Cascade through the month of July. So next week we will be back at Wallace, and then the week of July 22nd back at Cascade. We're going to deviate the week of July 29th just a little bit. We're going to take care of some homeless encampments that are happening out at Claggett Creek Nature Park. And so we're going to circle and incorporate that one. Aside from that, we've just been kind of toggling back and forth between Cascade and Wallace, and kind of taking little bites out of different areas of the parks. And today's at Cascade, the focus was the entrance towards the park, the off-leash areas around Cascade gateways, around the dumpsters areas, and that part of the park. We recovered over 50 Walmart shopping carts today during the cleanup, and 12 from Lowe's. Walmart, just as a little tidbit, in the last couple of months had bought over 600 new shopping carts to replace the ones that seem to be escaping from the store right next to Cascade. And so they had reached out to us indicating that already they're having problems with folks who are trying to patronize the store and not having enough grocery carts for folks to use because of the theft of all the grocery carts. So we made a point of letting them know that as we're doing these cleanups and any that are survivable in the cleanup where they haven't been taken apart for parts or, non-functioning, we would return to their stores. So we did that today. So that was quite an extensive number of shopping carts. And those are just from ones that were around kind of those areas that I talked about, by the off-leash area and the dumpster area. There was 50 so that were returned. So we're
Wow.
outside of that, I'll continue to provide those updates, kind of those statistics and those details from each of the cleanups as we, meet each month in the informational reports, just so you kind of have a handle on what areas we're at and what kind of accumulation is transpiring.
Perfect. Thank you. Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wondered how it was going on these cleanups and trying to eliminate the total number of campers in the parks, so where you don't turn around and move right back in. I think you'd indicated last time that it was reducing the encampments, but I just wondered if that's still working.
Well, yes and no since then. So overall at Wallace, yes. At Cascades, of course, whenever you say something's going well, it's Murphy's Law that you've jinxed it. So at Cascades, as you'll recall, we had just cleaned up, focused on kind of those shelter areas, the Beaver Grove and the Bluegill shelter areas, and back by the playground, kind of over that little bridge area in the back part of the park. And since we did that, there has been some folks who decided to move back in, and there's a parking lot, a decent sized parking lot that's back there. And what we're finding now is some of the car campers continue to keep breaking into and vandalizing our bollards. We have bollards up to help preclude from cars being able to park back there, so that it focuses more them in a more of a constrained area in the front of the park. And so they're continuing to vandalize and break those bollards. And we keep having to replace them to where we're out of bollards now and able to fix them. So we're having to order some more. So what's happening is they're trying to now go back into those back areas of the park that we just cleaned and start using those. And then also, like I said, some car camping. So we're going to start with code enforcement's help. We're going to start posting cars at Cascade and focus on getting some of those removed. But it's going to take a concerted effort, especially in those back parking lot areas, to try to keep them out. So we have some new bollards on order. We always keep a supply, but they're just, as soon as we get them in, they're vandalizing them and breaking them and just driving right back through there. So, we're going to try to focus on keeping those up. And we've had conversations with SPD with regard to that problem that we're having, and we're hoping for their assistance in helping us try to alleviate that issue.
Alan, did you have your hand up?
Actually, I did, but I think Jennifer answered most of my questions. And Jennifer, I'm sure you're aware, as a neighborhood chair, there's a email chain going around in my neighborhood chairs, and a lot of concern, a lot of questions, and a lot of information some of it accurate, some of it may not be, particularly about Gateway Cascade Park. And I think you've answered my question, so I won't take any more of your time, but please keep us posted, because there's a lot of people that are very upset, and there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of talking. And the more factual information they got, the better off we'll be.
I'm happy to.
Thank you, Alan. Keith.
Yeah, Jennifer, I was just, my question was just timeline, and sorry if this was in your report or if you mentioned it last month when I was out, but kind of what's the outlook in terms of finishing up the cleanup as you kind of take bites out of it, like you said?
So the timeline that was last shared with us, and I think, you know, that continues to be fluid, because some of that is contingent on kind of available housing for as we go in and do the cleanup. So there's a place at least that they can be offered to go to, and so that's kind of dictating some of this, a good share of this. But the last we heard that realistically, you know, we're looking probably into fall, that it would go at least all the way through summer and probably into fall. So we've got several weeks ahead of us minimally. We're really hoping that is the timeline, because our concern kind of, you know, quite honestly, is that if you get too far into fall and we start going into winter, there's going to be a reluctance by folks or council to want to continue that process. When we get to winter, there's a tendency in the winter to want to let them just, you know, kind of stay because of the cold climates and so forth, and kind of hunker down. So we're really hoping to kind of keep this proactively moving forward so that doesn't become an issue. But yeah. Others will make those decisions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Mm-hmm. Any further questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for all your work and for the great update.
Thank you.
Let's move into our recreation services update. And Becky, there you go. I know we have a great update from you, but was there anything you wanted to share that was not listed here?
Well, there were a couple of things I guess I'll just highlight. They were already in that report and that update, but I thought it was worth noting. There were a couple of folks tonight that have indicated that mentioned the excessive heat that we recently had. So just, I mean, we've had the tough part of the last couple years with COVID and ice storms and the smoke from fires, and now we've had excessive heat. So that happened to be on the very first day of our summer program. So for the first time ever, we ended up having to postpone or cancel those camps that day, but everybody was understanding, and we went forward and started the next day on Tuesday, and those camps have been going very, very well. So we're excited about that. On another positive thing was on the information on the events and City Hall. If those of you that maybe haven't already heard, is going to be reopening on July 19th. So we've been closed for over a year now. So we'll be reopening, and that means staff will be back in their offices and that type of thing. So which will really help for myself and a few other staff that deal with a variety of other teams' approach to approving permits and things like that. It makes it much better to actually be in the office and do that. So, and then the last third thing was just a reminder, it was mentioned already, Ironman is going to be happening in our park system, primarily centralized at Riverfront Park. That'll be on Sunday, July 25th. So if you're out and about and you see a lot of people riding bikes or running or people swimming in the Willamette River, that's what that is. That's the first time ever that we've had Ironman. It's a worldwide event. They do it in various countries and a lot in the United States. And we're the first one in Oregon. So looking forward to that.
Very exciting. Becky, when we have big events like that, do we put up a notice in the park ahead of time, certain amount of time to let people know that there's going to be a lot of traffic and potential closures?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, we do. We try to, like in this particular case, where they're going to be exiting the river for the swim portion at the riverfront boat dock. So there will be a sign posted there and in other areas of the park. We are working with our public information officer for Public Works, and he's actually been attending. There's been weekly meetings with Ironman, and he's been attending those because there's also a large portion of our street space that they'll be using when they're doing their bike riding and things. I mean, they're going to go into the county, but there will be city streets that they use for that. So there is a big push for not only posting signs in parks, but also just a press release and that type of thing. And then they've reached out to organizations because they're centralized at Riverfront Park. They've reached out to the Carousel and AC Gilbert or the Discovery Village, Sternwheeler, all of those too. So hopefully that public outreach will help us and help Ironman get the word out that that's occurring.
Makes sense. Any other questions for Becky? Okay, well, thank you so much, Becky. Really appreciate your time.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay, we're almost at the end of the agenda. We need to have a quick conversation about the August meeting, but before we get to that, I want to talk about if there's any new business that any board members would like to bring forward. Okay, I'm hearing none. So for the August meeting, I unfortunately will be out of town in August, and Tony and Patricia will also not be able to join us in August. So we have a couple options as a board. One is we can choose to cancel the August meeting as it stands right now and just do written updates, but we can also proceed. The current agenda item is Gretchen Bennett was going to attend to just give us an update on the status of the unsheltered individuals. And that can also be moved to September if we'd like. But Mickey obviously is vice chair, is a wonderful leader. So there's no issues in terms of leadership, but I don't know if other people have commitments already. I think the biggest concern would be a quorum if there's going to be several people traveling, as sometimes happens in August. So open to what members of the board would like in terms of the August meeting. I guess we could start with a more of a poll first. I mean, show of hands or verbally, is anyone else planning to be out for the August meeting at this point? Okay. What would folks prefer in terms of, I know in the past, there have been times where during the summer, there's sometimes the meetings that are canceled due to not having enough agenda items and quorum issues and whatnot. But there's always the option to continue, obviously, and provide that space to connect about parks issues. What would people prefer? Yeah, Alan.
I think I'm good either way. I was just buying airline tickets today, and I bought it to come back the day before this meeting. I need to come back anyway. But I would suggest that we not have a meeting, with the caveat that if something comes up we need to deal with in a more expeditious manner, that our vice chair just hold the meeting.
Paul?
Yeah, I would say that if we don't have any action items that require, formal board meeting, then I think the packets are usually comprehensive enough to provide information. If it's more of an information thing, I would, go along with waiting till September to do a formal meeting.
Mickey, yeah.
I just wanted to ask, how soon before time, I mean, we obviously need to make the decision tonight, but should we decide to not have one and then something comes up, how much notice has to be? Well, I guess we won't worry about it.
No, it's a good question. It's a good question in terms of, especially public notice requirements. Tony, Could you clarify that for us? If there was something that came up that we needed, like let's say council, there was a gear park thing or something where we needed to have a meeting. How soon, at what point would we have to make that public in accordance with public meeting laws?
You know, I'm going to defer and ask Mark. I want to say 24 hours. Mark?
So the absolute minimum for a special meeting is 24 hours, but more importantly, it's about providing adequate notice to provide sufficient opportunity for the public that may have an interest in the agenda item to be present. So I believe that the current practice as far as this board is to post the agenda the Thursday before. Is that Wednesday or Thursday? I think as late as Friday of the week before. My recommendation to the board would be if there is an action item that comes up that the board feels is necessary to hold a meeting on, that to the extent that it can, that announcement of the meeting be in accordance with what the standard practice is. That said, if it pops up on Monday of the week of the meeting, then that's the best that you can do. So that would be my recommendation to the board. If questions on that?
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that answers my question. Sorry, Dylan, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say I'm going to be really curious to see what council does in terms of the park. So that would be the only reason I could really think we need to come together. I was going to suggest as an alternative that we maybe talk about going to one of the games at Wallace for fun. And not, nothing formal, but just, I don't know, what would be a good day to go or a good
Meet
night.
each other in person, yeah.
I can check with Billy. I know he loves to, he always invites the board, and there are certain tournaments where I know one time the board came, Dave, I'm not sure if you were there. I'm trying to think of who is on the board that might have been there, but they had food provided for the board members. I'm not saying that would be the case. It would depend, and we're in a kind of a different kind of a transitioning world right now, but I'll check with Billy Powers and see if there are some good dates and let you know. I could do that next week.
Okay, that would be great, because I know we've talked about it in the past, maybe thinking about it, and now with so many restrictions being lifted, it might be a good time to do it in August.
Okay, I'll get back with you.
Thanks.
A great idea, Mickey. Thanks for suggesting that. I think that would be welcome for all of us. I know those of us that were able to do the birding tour had a great time being face-to-face out in the park. So
yeah, that is a good idea.
So what I'm currently hearing is that we will, for the time being, plan on canceling the meeting. But if there is something that comes up that requires an action, such as Gear Park in relation to council's decision, we will schedule the meeting with Mickey as serving in the chair role, and we will do our best to post that at least a week in advance, if at all possible. Yeah, Tony.
I would just say that if you do come together at the ball field, just keep in mind you can't discuss any kind of agenda items, because that would make it a public meeting, and we'd have to give notice.
I would actually, if I might, go just a little bit more expansive than that. I would recommend not discussing, even informally, anything that pertains to the nature of the board itself, not just action item, but information sharing that relates to items of interest to the board that may come before it. It tends to become very natural when you're working on things together on an ongoing basis to bring up those topics. So not just necessarily an action item itself, but information that may relate to an action item or areas of interest to this board. I would just stay away from all of that.
Duly noted. Thank you, Mark.
Just have fun.
I don't think we need a formal motion on this, but I guess I'll defer to you, Tony, or Mark, I guess, if the board is, if there's no concerns and we all feel that this is a good approach, but if there needs to be a motion, then we can do such a motion.
No, if you're all in agreement and you're all here, we don't need a motion.
Is there anyone that has reservations? I just want to make sure no one feels like this is not a good idea. Okay. Well, then,
for clarity, Dylan, in terms of, or maybe Mickey, in terms of if we decide to convene, is that a call that can be made by any board member, or are we gonna, we'll just email that request to Tony, or and Mickey can make the final call on that? I guess what's the process there?
It's a very good.
I would have Mickey contact either me or Patricia or Jennifer or all three of us and just let us know what the situation is.
I will do so.
Definitely Jennifer, because Patricia and I won't be in attendance.
Mickey, are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I don't anticipate anything, but yeah.
And I imagine if there was, it ideally will be fairly clear in terms of like the gear park, that it needs to come back to us before it goes to council. And so that pathway will hopefully reveal itself for us.
I agree. And anything can probably wait till September anyway.
Okay, well, wonderful. And we may be meeting in person in September. Tony, I don't want to speak too soon, but it sounds like if City Hall is opening up, there's a chance that in the fall, at least by October or November, we can all be in person.
I think so. I mean, actually it'd be a good time with all of you here. Are you all comfortable coming together in person?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, as I get more information, I will certainly share it with you on whether it'll be September or October.
And I'll just say, recognizing we're in a public meeting and whatnot as well, if anyone does not feel comfortable with that, I would just encourage you to reach out to Tony or myself or both of us, and we can work on making accommodations to make sure that that is, that you all feel comfortable in that space. Not always easy to be put on the spot in this kind of meeting. So feel free to follow up on that as well.
Yeah, good point, Dylan. Thank you.
Okay, any further business or topics that we have not fully covered before we adjourn? Okay, hearing none, this meeting is adjourned and we will see each other again in September, if not before, at a possible August gathering. Thank you, Mickey, for that suggestion, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.
Have a good summer.
Night.